Welcome to Subconscious Conversations, where we take a look into the intricate world of the subconscious mind and how to heal the body, mind, heart, and spirit through its wisdom and guidance. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Brielle, and I'm the soul practitioner at Springseed Wellness, where I practice the energy medicine techniques of Soul Survey, which I created myself, and Emotion Code, Body Code, and Belief Code, which were created by Dr. Bradley Nelson, as well as Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique, which was created by Dolores Cannon. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the spookier subjects in this work, which include entities and other offensive energies. Because, after all, it is Halloween month. Happy October, everybody! I'm going to start with the least offensive interfering energies and work up to the most offensive, at least within my opinion. Now, this might be an uncomfortable subject for a lot of people, and it's not something that's widely talked about by many people, but it's a very important subject, I think. It's stuff we all want to pretend that doesn't exist, but it very much does, and I believe the more aware of it we are, the better we can protect ourselves from any offensive energies. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to talk about is courting. So you may have heard about courting before, but I'll explain anyway because a lot of you might not have heard about this before. But courting is an energetic attachment between two different people. And you might be asking, well, why is that bad? It sounds like a good thing to have a strong energetic connection with other people. But this is actually an unhealthy attachment. Now, I have heard some debate on whether courting is always bad or whether there are good forms of courting. Personally, I believe that we do form energetic connections with people that are healthy, but the courting that I'm talking about and that might come up in a body code session is when the energetic connection becomes unbalanced and unhealthy. And this is a situation where one person can kind of suck the energy out of another person or feed them negative energy. And this is much more along the lines of like a codependent relationship or a dynamic where one person is trying to control the other person or convince them to think a certain way or feel a certain way. And when you have negative energy exchange between two people where the intention is either controlling or needy, it causes a lot of friction in the relationship and can even destroy a relationship. And when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about any kind of relationship, whether it be parents, children, friends, coworkers, lovers, what have you. Any and every kind of relationship can form cords. And it's really important to remove those cords so that you can either make a clean break from that person or have a positive, more balanced relationship with that person. Now, sometimes when a relationship ends very suddenly and there was a cord between the two people, you can end up with kind of a loose end on the cord, and then you feel kind of desperate to attach it to something else. So in those instances, it's even more important to remove those cords, or you could end up harming another relationship unintentionally. But I want to make a very important point here, which is that these cords can form either intentionally, like when one person is trying to control the other person, or they can happen subconsciously, kind of by accident. So don't be too hasty to get upset or blame the other person if you find a cord between you and someone else, because that cord could have been initiated from your end or from their end or just by accident. So it shouldn't become a blame game, just something to be easily and quickly removed so that both parties can be more positive and balanced. Now, another form of offensive energy that most of us don't even think about or even realize is post hypnotic suggestions. Now, these are essentially everywhere all the time, in my opinion. Most people don't realize that when we watch TV or online videos or listen to music, your brain can quickly drop into an alpha brainwave state, which is a light hypnotic state, and that leaves you very vulnerable to subconscious suggestions. And every company, every advertiser, every platform out there knows this and uses it to their advantage. And we've all heard about the subliminal messages in the media or in commercials, but we just kind of ignore it because, really, what are we going to do about it? But it does exist everywhere all the time, and it's important to be aware of. But it's not just the media and entertainment either. Other people can feed you these subliminal post hypnotic suggestions as well. And this can either be someone just naturally saying repetitive things to us, or it can be someone purposely using subliminal words and tactics to try and influence our thoughts and behaviors. But whatever the source of the post hypnotic suggestion, it's especially effective if we're asleep or in any other sort of hypnotic state or altered mental state at the time. And it's not just targeted subliminal messages either. It's also the tone, the intention, the message that's contained within whatever you're watching or listening to. So just give a second to think about how vulnerable you are to this type of offensive energy if you're, say, falling asleep with the TV on. And maybe give a little extra thought to what you watch on TV while you fall asleep. You just might notice a huge improvement in your general attitude if you watch something lighthearted and peaceful before bed rather than, say, murder mysteries, horror flicks, or action movies. Just talking from personal experience there. But it's very important to remove these post-hypnotic suggestions because they can cause all sorts of mental, emotional, and physical issues, because it can lead to depression, addiction, self-harm, and so on. And it's extremely helpful to find out what the post-hypnotic messages are and where they come from so that you can avoid that same source and protect yourself from future harm. Okay, so the next offensive energy we're going to be talking about is called a saboteur. And these are strong negative energies intended to harm or control another person or even yourself. They can cause pain, loss of energy, and can hinder someone from recovering and healing. And there are three main types of saboteurs, which are energy weapons, energy wounds, and control mechanisms. An energy weapon is exactly that. It's a weapon, usually a blade of some sort, made up of energy and intended to inflict pain and harm on the person. An energy wound is more like you've been wounded energetically and you're sort of bleeding out your energy. You might be kind of rolling your eyes and thinking, oh yeah, right. But both of these can cause very noticeable physical discomfort. And when you remove an energetic knife from your back and all of a sudden your chronic pain is gone, you'll believe it. Or when you heal an energy wound and shortly after you no longer feel drained all the time, you'll believe it. Now, control mechanisms are not as physically noticeable, but those are intended to control the behavior of the person. So it will probably be noticeable in some regard, but it is pretty subtle. But there are so many times when we have, say, random unexplained pain, or where we find ourselves behaving a little bit atypical from our norm. And that can happen for so many different reasons. So it's kind of hard to tell when these things are present. In fact, I occasionally have other practitioners work on me, and one of them one time found that I had an energy weapon, kind of like needles, that were stuck into my feet at the moment of conception. So that was with me my entire life, and I never would have known it. Except looking back on it now, I did have some minor issues with my feet my whole life, so it totally makes sense. And these saboteurs can come from either another person, yourself, or from an entity. And I think it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's very helpful to get rid of these harmful negative energies because they cause us pain and alter our behavior. And it's really important to know what part of you is being affected and where it came from, so that you can focus on giving a little bit more healing attention to whatever part of your body is being affected, and so that you can have a better idea of how to avoid these sorts of interferences in the future as well. So, if you're not creeped out enough yet, let's move on to curses. Yes, curses actually do exist, and they are very real. But most surprisingly, and the most scary part to me anyway, is that they can be done completely unintentionally. So this is another area where you want to be really careful not to be too hasty in blaming someone who cursed you, because it could have been a completely unintentional thing that happened in a brief moment of frustration. And curses don't always come from another person either. They can come from yourself or an entity as well. So it's really helpful to determine the source of the curse as well as the intent of the curse. The intent can be a wide range of things, but it is intended to interfere with, sabotage, or block something in someone's life in some way or another. So it is always going to be disruptive. So it's really important to remove those. But I find it just absolutely terrifying that I can accidentally curse someone just by thinking negative thoughts about them. Therefore, I always try and keep my thoughts and intentions in check. Always. I mean, I am human, but I really try my best to stay on the positive side of things rather than holding resentments. Because the last thing I want to do is to hurt someone else, even if they have hurt me. And now we're at the final and creepiest subject, which you've heard me mention a couple times, which is entities, or as most people call them, spirits. And this is an area where I initially had the most unease myself because I've always been inexplicably terrified of spirits ever since I can remember. So I very much preferred to just kind of pretend that they didn't really exist. But when I was first getting into this work and I kept having entity attachments coming up and stuff like that, I was scared. However, I realized that the fact that I had so many offensive energies and entities was probably why I was always inexplicably afraid of them. But I also learned how to get rid of them for good and how to avoid being vulnerable to them moving forward. Now, there's a whole lot of differing views and opinions out there about this subject, but I'm going to stick to what I was taught through my certification and what I have experienced firsthand. First and foremost, I think it's important to understand that there are essentially two main types of entities, which is why I use that term rather than spirit. But the first type is a disembodied spirit, which means someone who was alive but is no longer living. However, brief side note here, I have also seen a couple times when a client has had an entity attached to them who was a disembodied spirit of someone that they had known in the past but were not currently in contact with. And then the client asks me, well, does that mean that that person has passed away? And at first I was just making the assumption that, well, yeah, that's what it means. But then other possibilities started to go through my mind. So I muscle tested to try and determine, and I couldn't get a clear answer at all. So I can't say definitively, but I think sometimes it can happen where a spirit temporarily disembodies from a still living person, like someone in a coma or some other altered state of consciousness. Again, can't say for absolute certainty, but I suspect it might be possible. Now, the second type of entity is called a dark entity, which is a spirit that was never living. And religious people would probably call these demons or something similar to that idea. And in my opinion, determining the type of entity is vitally important because I personally have completely different approaches depending on what type I'm dealing with. And I'll get a little bit more detailed about that in the next episode. But these entities can attach to someone or, surprisingly, animals as well for different reasons and at different times. Religious people would probably liken entity attachments to a demonic possession or something along those lines. Sometimes it's an entity wanting to have some sort of human experience or to relive human experiences. So they'll attach to someone to try and live vicariously through them, which, as you can imagine, could lead to any number of negative behaviors. And sometimes there's a nefarious purpose of some sort, which I'm sure you can imagine any number of ways that that would be very harmful. And there are different levels of intensity as well. Sometimes they're just mildly annoying, and sometimes they completely disrupt our lives. But in any case, it's not really actually anything to really fear that much because they can easily be gotten rid of, and you can learn how to avoid attachment in the future. Some of the ways you end up being more vulnerable to attachment are if you're intoxicated or if you're in an extremely distressed emotional state or in a very dark mental state. Basically, any time we're weak physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, we're more vulnerable. So it's really important to learn how to manage our health in all of these aspects because the worse we feel, the more vulnerable we are to entities, and the more entity interference that we have, the worse we feel, and it creates a feedback loop of worsening conditions. So it's very vital to get rid of them and to learn how to protect against them. And if you have a skilled and knowledgeable practitioner, they will be able to give you a multitude of options for ways to help protect yourself, which mostly all center around having the focus and intention of protection and keeping your energy as positive as possible as often as possible. And you can look up many different ways on your own as well. Prayer is a big one for a lot of people, but if you don't practice prayer, there are many, many different approaches. So if that, happens to be a common issue for you, you'll definitely want to reach out to a practitioner, look into different options for yourself. Another point I want to make very clear is that I don't tend to dig very deep for very many details with any of the offensive energies, but especially not the entity attachments, because the more attention we give that negative energy, the more we're feeding that negative energy and the stronger it becomes. And likewise, it's vital not to allow yourself to be in fear of them either. Again, especially with the entities, because fear also feeds them. In fact, they will purposely try to feed you fear in order to gain strength. So, whenever you're dealing with offensive energies and entities in particular, it's very important to not give it much attention at all. Simply find it, determine the associated imbalances, get rid of it, and address anything else you need to in order to decrease your susceptibility moving forward. It's really pretty simple, quick, and easy. But the more you allow yourself to be in fear of these things, the more you'll attract them. And the more attention you give them, the more you'll attract them. So just do your best to keep your focus on the positive and on your personal protection, and you'll be fine. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the effect of these things by any means, as I'm pretty sure I've made it abundantly clear these offensive energies can be very detrimental and disruptive. But the important thing is to just get rid of them and move on from a better place. If it comes up in your session, great. You've accomplished a huge breakthrough by getting rid of it. But other than that, try not to even let it be a focus, or you'll be unintentionally feeding the problem. And that's the last parting point I want to make. I always follow the subconscious in the sequence of events. So I've had clients come to me feeling like they have an entity attachment and wanting to find out and clear it. And if it still doesn't come up in the course of their session, they might feel a little frustrated. But the subconscious mind knows the correct sequence of what to release and when. So if you ask about it and it doesn't come up, that either means it's not an issue for you or that it's not time for you to get rid of it just yet. And if I just jump in and start clearing out any and all entities or other offensive energies, it might actually have a negative effect if it's not done in the correct manner or in the right sequence. Or it just might not be a long-lasting fix. Because if you don't follow the sequence of events as the subconscious is guiding, then well, A, what's the point of the subconscious conversation in the first place? But B, those offensive energies, or rather other ones, are just going to end up coming right back in. And if you release a minor annoying entity but don't clear up any of the underlying issues, you're leaving room for a nastier, more harmful entity to attach, and you've inadvertently made your situation worse. And I believe wholeheartedly that it's really vitally important to follow the subconscious guidance in order to clear everything out in the appropriate timing. Otherwise, the results just aren't going to be as impactful or permanent. However, I can be pretty tactful in my focus and in my approach so that I can maximize the benefit you get out of your session. But I think it's really important to clarify that I might not be able to get all the answers you're looking for in one session alone. It just all depends on what your subconscious indicates that you need. I really try and be very careful to let the subconscious of the client guide things rather than to let the client's conscious mind, or God forbid, even worse, allow my own ego to take over guiding the session. So just try to be patient with the process as your subconscious unfolds it, because it is super wise and it knows. And that is the best way towards long-lasting healing. So in conclusion, yes, negative offensive energies exist all around us, and they can interfere with our lives in many different ways and in different intensities. But ultimately, there's really nothing to fear. Just get rid of them and move on. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and please be sure to join me for the next episode where I'll be getting even deeper into spooky subjects. See you then! If you would like to set up a session with me to experience this work for yourself, please go to springseedwellness.com. If you would like to find a practitioner in your local area, please go to discoverhealing.com. And please always feel free to reach out with any questions or specific topics you would like me to address. See you next episode.